Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Welcome to one of the last days of 3.16 hype spoiler season, and today we got probably the most important remaining piece of information for the purposes of build creation. That is, of course, the new and changed gem stats. All we've got is the gems as they look at 2020, so that may not cover everything. Obviously, at league start, you might be using a much lower level version of a gem and you won't have access to quality as yet. And ultimately, at endgame, you're going to try to want to scale some of your gems beyond gem level 20 via various means. But 2020 gives us a good starting point to assess what gems are looking good. So let's start with the new gems. I'll go through those in some detail, and then after that, we'll go through the changes, and that'll be a quicker look because I'll only discuss the ones at length that are more significant. So let's start with Flame Link. Flame Link looks good. So this is one of the new link skills. These are the new type of more active support that's being added in 3.16, something that's weaker than the old aura bots, but that should still be powerful enough to justify using. Flame Link is quite situational in that the target that you are linking to needs to be able to scale base fire damage well. But if they can, it's going to grant them a tremendous amount of it. So Flame Link grants the linked target around about 200 flat added fire damage, but also grants some additional flat fire damage based upon 5% of your maximum life. What this really screams to me is that you would use it in a party of chieftains. Like you would have chieftains enhancing each other with this, and they would be getting a tremendous amount of fire damage. Chieftains inherently tend to have a lot of life, and so you could end up with something really solid. It needs to be tested out whether if one player initiates a link on another, can the recipient of that link initiate a link back? This has never been answered. My sort of intuition is that it should work, but a lot of other people's intuition is that it shouldn't. So we're just got to clarify that. But regardless, if you've got a party of 3, you can have A links to B, initiates a link that B receives, B initiates a link C receives, C initiates a link that A receives, and therefore everyone is benefiting from one. However, if you do have some sort of complex shenanigans like this, do remember that if one party member dies and everyone's linked to each other, then the whole party falls over dead. So that's something that really needs to be taken into account. These are going to be something that need to be used very, very, very carefully in hardcore environments. But in softcore, you can take a bit more of a YOLO attitude to it. Additionally, you can use these on minions, but not by default. You need to opt into the ability to use them on minions, and you can only use them on destructible minions. So no Herald of Agony, sorry. Protective Link is next. Protective Link is really interesting in that it transfers one aspect of your character, your potential to block, your percentage chance to block, including your maximum chance to block. It transfers that to another player, but it doesn't transfer any of the consequences you might have paid to get that. What I'm thinking about here is a little thing called Glancing Blows. So there is a keystone on the passive tree that doubles your chance to block attacks and spells. This doesn't change your cap, so your cap is still 75%. However, the drawback for Glancing Blows is that those attacks that you do block deal 65% of base damage instead of dealing 0. So with Protective Link, where I think this really shines is if you are a Glancing Blows character, you've built up 75 or even 77% chance to block attacks through the use of Glancing Blows, one of the block mastery nodes, and a bunch of just small sources of block around the tree or on your gear. It's not even hard to do that with a staff, much less with a shield. And then you donate this chance to block to another player. Now you've still got it, although you've got the drawbacks of the Glancing Blows keystone. But they pick up all of this massive amount of attack block without the drawback of being stuck with the Glancing Blows keystone. Of course, if they die, you die, so there is a high cost to this power. But I do think they get a lot from it, Protective Link. So Protective Link and Flame Link grant the recipient of the link a lot of power. I don't think that's the case for all of the links. And next we have Intuitive Link, which also grants a lot of power and is sort of more at the zany end. Now this is also a support gem, so it's sort of like Spellslinger in that sense. It's both an active skill and a support, and they link to each other. But the way that it works is that you set up a link with someone, and then the Intuitive Link, while that link remains in place, it causes anything that is linked to Intuitive Link to trigger when the recipient of the link strikes when they hit an enemy. So this can enable their attacks to carry through additional ones from you. Not necessarily attacks from you, it would be spells from you. This is really, really, really solid and can do some crazy things, especially if you've got some sort of combo setup between what you're using and what the person that is carrying the link is using. I think there'll be a lot of complicated uses for this skill that people will just have to theory craft over the league. This will take a long time to get solved as to what the best use case for it is. I'm really hoping the numbers on this are good enough. This is something that is really impossible to judge at the moment. We're going to have to test out in practice. But I think it's probably quite good, but we're just going to have to see by actually playing with it. And I think that some of the skills I really like the idea of using with Intuitive Link would be things like Arc that have tremendous damage projection already as a way to deal with all of the stragglers. So the player that is the recipient of the link, their focus is on single target, and the Intuitive Link covers all of the clear needs. Poisonous Concoction is next. This is another one of those I yeet flasks type abilities, but unlike the existing one, Explosive Concoction, it seems like the numbers are pretty good on it. So big amount of chaos damage on this, and it will also drink some of your life flask charges and convert them into additional chaos damage. The base chaos damage on this is really high. It kind of needs to be because you are required to have an empty main hand and no offhand weapon. So that means that you are basically stuck. You're comparing this to something like Face Breakers, essentially. What we really need to know with Poisonous Concoction is what the damage projection is like on it. This skill is going to live or die based upon whether it can project damage to multiple targets effectively or not. And if it can, then it's going to be pretty solid. If it can't, then it's just going to die on that hill. Next, we've got Temporal Rift, which is a skill that was previewed and basically constantly snapshots your character. This skill causes echoes of your character to be created that remember their location, their mana, their hit points, and their energy shield at various times. So I believe that it snapshots you each 1/4 of 1 second. And then if you find yourself in an unfavorable situation, you can rewind to one of these past selves. It'll always rewind you to the oldest one, and that seems to be something that will certainly have some uses. The buff makes you immune to temporal chains anyway, and so I think people will use it just in temp chains, curse maps a lot of the time, and just as something that solves that problem for 10% mana reservation. But I think this is something that will reward players that are able to find interesting ways to burn all of their resources in a split second to do a lot of damage. So if you're in a situation where you can burn a huge amount of your life, a huge amount of your mana or energy shield, do a lot of damage, you can do that, then revert to a past self Temporal Rift, and that could potentially be quite strong. Additionally, this is pretty good for any boss that has a high damage but fundamentally survivable skill. So it's something that's not a slam, something that's really hard to dodge. This can potentially keep you alive if you are likely to take a whole bunch of damage from something. Tornado is next, and Tornado just feels like we can't judge it yet. The 67% increased movement speed is very good on it, but I don't know that that's going to be enough. So this creates a tornado that deals repeated damage to enemies around it, but you have to empower this tornado by firing a whole bunch of projectiles in it when it starts. I feel like this skill might have a lot of utility for giving ranged type characters extra boss damage. It may be used in that situation, but otherwise I'm just not seeing it. It feels like it will be too clunky. That said, once we see the movement speed, once we see its sort of target selection, at that point I'm willing to reassess this. But for now, I'm not very warm on this skill. Vampiric Link is next, and where some of the other skills transfer a really powerful attribute from your character or sort of give them a copy of a really powerful attribute of your character, this gives them a copy of your life leech, which is kind of nice in theory, except I just don't think that the opportunity cost of not using a better link is worth it. So you are giving them access to essentially Slayer Leech from you. So it's like you're giving them all of the benefits of Slayer Leech. This is great, but I just don't think it's anywhere near as good as giving them capped attack block, or possibly even over-capped attack block, or giving them a massive gob of fire damage, or giving them the ability to disgorge vast quantities of spells. So for that reason, Vampiric Link, I think, is probably DOA. Willing to be proven wrong on that, but I sort of don't expect to be. Destructive Link is next, and this transfers a different attribute to them, which is your critical strike multiplier from your main hand. Now, this gives them your main hand critical strike chance. So this means that this only works if they're an attack build that has spec'd into critical strike multiplier, but not into critical strike chance, which I think is a pretty rare situation. If you find yourself in that situation, then yeah, Destructive Link is exactly what a character like that needs. But otherwise, I think that all of the investment you would do to build up critical strike multiplier on your character in order to make Destructive Link good would generally also build up critical strike chance on your character. And as a result, I'm not really that impressed with Destructive Link. Maybe you would use this at league start. If you're working with a party and your party member has a cast on critical strike setup, that might be okay, but I think you could probably do better with something else. Okay, so next we have Energy Blade, and it turns out Energy Blade does not seem to scale very much with gem level. So Energy Blade is gives minimum lightning damage equal to 5% of your energy shield and maximum lightning damage equal to 100% of your energy shield plus a number. These numbers don't scale very high. So Energy Blade is a complex skill. What it does, the way that I like to think of it, it consumes 80% of your energy shield in order to turn the last 20% into a massive lightsaber. So that last 20% of your energy shield will still protect your life as normal, but it will also allow you to make devastating attacks against enemies with new weapons. And these weapons actually overwrite your existing weapons. So it's a really complicated skill. But basically, it doesn't scale much with gem level. If you're going to use this, the key thing you need is to increase the amount of energy shield your character can get. Lastly, this is in a really strange place where this is the only thing in the game, the only buff in the game, where you actually want less buff effect. I don't know if there's any way to get less buff effect at the moment, but you'll notice that there's that line at the bottom, buff grants 80% less maximum energy shield. If you could instead make it, if you could somehow reduce that somehow, then this would be much stronger. Energy Blade is interesting, and I'm kind of keen to see what people can do with it, just as something that creates a totally new way of scaling attack builds, and also as something that will potentially allow some interesting ignite shenanigans. But it's going to totally require gearing a character completely differently. An Energy Blade build could be really interesting, and I may have a go at making one, but I think this is going to be the sort of skill that people might come back to later in the league and try and figure out. Lastly, do consider that the base amount of energy shield on gear is going to be higher this league due to the new Uber Quality / Sacred Orb system, and so that may make Energy Blade a little bit better than you're currently thinking it is. Okay, so next up we have Soul Link, which is a defensive link, and that this both essentially transfers some of your energy shield to the player, although not exactly that, and also grants the linked target, they take less damage. So this is a pretty powerful defense for the player that you're using it on. Of course, it has all of the other drawbacks of the link skills. I kind of think that this is one of the better links without it being necessarily as strong as I think Flame Link might be. And it's certainly not as cool as Intuitive Link. Okay, so let's go through all of the updated gems now. You'll notice there's a number of small changes to melee strike range. Some of this has been moved back to the passive tree. So there's something like 6 points of melee strike range on the passive tree now that are easy to get. And so that's what's going on here. That's why a lot of skills have lost 2 points of melee strike range. Vile Immortal Call. This has not been available in temporary leagues for something like 10 leagues. It was completely and utterly broken when it was available, and it's finally being put out to pasture by giving it a cooldown time of 60 seconds. This has been causing problems in Standard League for a long time, where it is the centerpiece of basically every Immortal character in the game. Vile Molten Shell. So the buff no longer grants 29% more armor. However, it is now granting 39% of damage from hits taken from the buff before your life or energy shield, and this can be up to 30% of your armor to a maximum of 30,000. So previously that was 35%. Additionally, the buff grants a larger amount of flat armor. So where do I think this comes out overall? I think it's slightly better than it was. Vile Molten Shell has been good for a while as well, so this is a slight buff to an already good skill. Vile Double Strike is the range situation again. That's something that you'll see a lot of. Vile Grace. Vile Grace has been totally overhauled. It's going from the strongest defense in the game to something that is just going to be solid, but it will genuinely be good. So 15% chance to evade attack hits is pretty huge. This means that if your evasion is not at a ridiculously high level, this will be a large amount of defense. And then suppressed spell damage dealt to you as unlucky is something that rewards you for having capped spell suppression. And it's a pretty substantial reward as well. I think that every build that used to use Vile Grace will consider using the new version of it, but it will feel somewhat different to how it used to feel. All cold damage over time spells have had their numbers changed, as have all of the fire damage over time spells. So we'll skip those ones unless they're outliers. Generally speaking, though, because of the changes to Elemental Equilibrium and Elemental Overload, most of the numbers have been increased by 60%. So, Fireball, Vile Fireball. You'll notice it's losing this 88% more damage with Ignite. That's actually okay because all Ignite full stop in the game is getting 150% more damage. So Vile Fireball comes out ahead of where it was in 3.15. That's the same with Fireball, with Classic Fireball as well, and a number of other skills that were outliers. The ones that were previously the only valid Ignite skills, like Fireball and Armageddon Brand, they're losing some of that more damage with Ignite that they had in order to make them not completely break the game with the new Ignite buffs. Vile Flame Blast is getting a nerf along these lines as well. Could still be quite good though. 70% more damage with ailments for each stage is a lot of damage still, especially given that Ignite is dealing 150% more damage. So that's really, really big. Vile Righteous Fire is just dealing more fire damage. Again, this is just compensating for the changes that are being made. It's still the same gem it used to be, and it will still be used a lot for the purposes of the more spell damage modifier, and that will be the primary thing that it's used for, and any damage it does is a bonus. Absolution is next. So Absolution is getting buffed to the moon, but probably not far enough. What Absolution still fundamentally needs is a way to simultaneously scale your character's cast speed and the Sentinel of Absolution cast speed. It's not gaining that. There's nothing on the passive tree that seems to do that. And as a result, I think Absolution will continue to be mediocre. But the +4 to radius is a huge buff that this skill really did sorely need. And the ability to summon or refresh a Sentinel of Absolution on hitting a rare enemy is a big deal too. That was one of the biggest problems with the skill that's being fixed, but ultimately it's not quite enough. Battle Mage's Cry is picking up the critical tag. Now there's a few things that are getting the critical tag, and it matters more if it is a skill that has a large degree of sensitivity, a skill or support for that matter, that has a large degree of sensitivity to gem level. So that's the big deal with critical tags. Awakened cast on Critical Strike being the big one. Awakened cast on Critical Strike is getting a huge buff with all of these changes. Determination is getting a new line, and that line is a big deal. So it looks like it's getting a 2% nerf until you see you and nearby allies gain 2051 additional armor. Because of all the nerfs they're making to Aurabots, they can buff some of the auras that were held down because Aurabots existed. Those auras can be buffed to the moon, and that's happening with Determination. I still don't think you will use Determination on builds that are not stacking armor somewhat, but at least it feels like a valid choice to do so now. Now that they're getting both the 2000 flat armor and 50% more armor, roughly. Another melee strike range change, and then we've got Dread Banner. So Dread Banner is just changing as a result of the fortification changes, and this is essentially the new way that 1% increased fortify effect per stage is being implemented, and I think it seems like it'll be fine. If you were using it before, you're probably still going to use it now. Flesh and Stone is reducing its reservation, and that's because of the changes / nerfs to blind. It will still be okay, but it is losing some of that physical damage as well because of the mana reservations being decreased. I still think you will use this if you were using it before, and I think it's mostly about the same power level it used to be, better in some ways, worse in others, except of course for the blind section, which blind is in a much weaker state than it was before. Melee range changes, just little things here and there that are pretty small, but again, made up for by the passive tree. The Infernal Cry support gem is picking up a trigger tag, which I don't think has any real impact on the game. Shield Charge is getting its numbers changed a little bit. It's getting nerfed on low defensive shields, and potentially will be about as good as it used to be on higher end defensive shields for dealing damage. Most people that use Shield Charge don't care about the damage it deals, and so for that reason it doesn't matter very much. Shield Crush is getting similar changes, except Shield Crush people tend to care a bit more about the damage that it does because it is a damage skill. Slight nerf, nothing substantial. Steel Skin, this is a big one. Buff grants immunity to bleeding. Now, Steel Skin is in a tricky spot where you often find that Steel Skin's buff, if you're taking heavy damage, it's not going to last very long. So you're going to want to work out, assuming that you manually cast Steel Skin, this is going to add a new degree of strategy to when you cast it. Before, you always cast it preemptively. It's like, oh, okay, I'm walking up to a pack of enemies, press whatever button Steel Skin is on, cast it, and go in there, and it's there for the first time that you hit. However, that may no longer be the best situation. You might want to first take a big hit, then hit that Steel Skin button straight away. I like this change. I think it's going to make things really interesting to sort of play around with. And I think Steel Skin is in a really, really good place now. Note that there was a bit of discussion that Molten Shell might have granted immunity to Ignite that was mentioned quite some time ago by Chris Wilson. That doesn't seem to have happened. Vigilant Strike is next. This skill is being nerfed somewhat for the purposes of builds that just use it, well, nerfed significantly for builds that just use it for Fortify, whilst it is also being buffed for builds that actually use it to attack as well. Ambush is really strange. Like, this is the wording on this. It seems like it's getting 25% base crit instead of 276% increased critical strike chance. If I am reading that correctly, then this is a considerable buff. It's also picking up the critical tag, which influences one of the critical masteries. And that probably still doesn't change anything. I still don't see it being all that relevant. So when I first saw the changes that are being made to Blade Vortex and Bladefall, which are getting the critical tag, I was really excited. I was like, hang on, isn't there a critical mastery node on the passive tree that grants +3 gem levels to critical gems? Isn't this going to be insane? Then I had another look at that critical mastery and it was like, time to be a bit deflated at this point. It is +3 to the level of critical support gems. So the change to add critical is pretty much irrelevant on Blade Vortex and Bladefall. Next we have Burning Arrow, which is getting a complete and utter redesign that's sort of just trying to decrease some of the complexity on it and keep it at roughly the same power it used to be. I have no idea whether they're going to succeed at that goal. But basically, it's just getting a whole bunch of extra damage, a whole bunch of extra fire damage to attacks against ignited enemies, i.e. it is getting Immolate support built in. So that means that the first hit will tickle, the second hit will thump, and then it's getting the increased fire damage, which presumably is its quality tag. Numbers on it are being increased a bit, but the attack speed is being decreased a bit. That's a wash overall, and it's gaining only a 25% chance to ignite enemies. I think that this is a very simple skill gem now, which is what GG were going for. They wanted it to be something really basic for the newest players because it's the first gem you get if you go a ranger, and it used to be one of the more complex gems in the game. But it's just going to be, once you set something on fire, it's going to burn. You know, it's going to be hit harder by burning arrows in the future. Don't know if it's going to be any good or not. Don't think so, but we can give it a mess around and find out. Copper Lash also getting the critical tag, and also was one of those skills that really gutted me when I realized that it was critical supports only. More melee strike range changes, and then there's a little bit of a change here with Explosive Arrow. Explosion deals 5% more damage with hits per explosive arrow on target. So this is no longer going to have quite as much synergy with Ignite, but that also needs to be factored in that it's being paired with the tremendous buffs to Ignite. So it will actually Ignite better than it did back when it used to have this extra synergy. Here's Explosive Concoction. It's getting the chance to attack faster and doesn't have the extra damage it needs. I don't think this is in a good place at the moment. I don't think this solves the fundamental problems Explosive Concoction had, and so I think it will continue to be an underused skill. Fire Trap is just the dot multi changes. Frenzy is just what we're expecting with the melee range, as is Pestilent Strike and Puncture. Grace, though. Grace is getting buffed to the moon. Again, one of those things where the fact that they changed Aurabots so much, they nerfed Aurabots, allowed them to unnerf some of the defensive auras in particular. These defensive auras are much better than they used to be as a result of that. So in addition to still granting the 2500 flat evasion, Grace is also now granting 29% more evasion rating. This is a huge buff, and it also means that Grace scales much, much, much better than it used to with other sources of evasion gear, and also with Aura Effect. This is definitely one of those defensive auras that gets a lot from having a few sources of Aura Effect on your character. So Precision picked up the critical tag, but again, it doesn't matter so much because it's not a support gem. Shattering Steel has had a couple of complexity changes, but mostly it is removing its ability to scale ignites and poisons as well as it used to. That's unfortunate from a poison perspective, but from an ignite perspective, it was probably a needed change because of all of the buffs to Shattering Steel. Sorry, not to Shattering Steel, to Ignite generally. Spectral Shield Throw has had a few nerfs. These are not the smashing nerfs people might have expected. They are significant. They're just not smashing. I still think Spectral Shield Throw could be in a very, very, very powerful place this league. The difference, though, is that it will perform meaningfully worse on dumpster tier gear. That is going to be the big change with Spectral Shield Throw. It will no longer be, you will no longer be able to do all the encounters up to, but not really including, say, Guardian's Aid encounters with dumpster tier gear. You'll start to need to improve your character's gear about the same time that other builds need to do so. So, 3 Watchstone Conquerors or so. A Spectral Throw, just a small buff to mana consumption, nothing more. Ice Golem, nothing meaningful. We'll jump down. Armageddon Brand is next. So Armageddon Brand had 250% more damage with Ignites. This is being basically gutted, and ultimately the skill is looking like it's doing a bunch of extra hit damage, and so ultimately Armageddon Brand Ignite should probably be in about the same place it was before, which was a reasonable place, but then there's also now the ability to play it with hit. Do keep in mind that losing this 250% more damage with Ignite is a big deal, but you are getting 150% more damage from the changes. And then you're getting this extra base damage added in. I think all in all, it will actually be at least as good, maybe even better. Assassin's Mark, no significant changes there. Bone Offering is being changed to minions no longer gaining life when they block. They will instead gain life regen per second if they've blocked recently. This is going to make the skill better on minions that don't block often, but it's going to make it meaningfully worse on players. And that's the reason that this change was being made, I would expect. Cold Snap is damage over time. Creeping Frost is the same. It's just getting that 60-ish% buff to damage over time to compensate for some of the other changes. So just damage over time, cold damage over time as an archetype is looking strong according to Shack Central. and I will put a link in the description below to his outline when it becomes available, assuming I remember to do that. I don't think it's out yet, but when he does put it together, I will put a link down there, and as long as I remember to do so. Dark Pact is getting a couple of little buffs and also is going to be a lot worse because of the totem situation. I think that it was able to use totem life in the past, and so now it's going to be, that's going to basically not really work as a build anymore. You're going to want to use it either from your life or from a skeleton's life. Discharge. Discharge has a nerf to its ability to ignite. However, this is still a net buff. Losing 25%, or going from doing 70% damage with ailments to 45% seems like a pretty smashing nerf, but it's actually something like a 50% buff to ignite discharge when you take the whole package overall. As a result, I think ignite discharge is looking really good. And if I'm not able to make the current Fireball Ignite build that I'm trying to work on look good, then discharge is certainly a backup plan. Divine Ire is another example where a skill is getting a nerf to its ability to inflict ignite that does not compensate for the new changes to ignite, and Fireball is exactly the same. Flame Surge, here's the big one. We do not know exactly how this is going to work, how it's going to scale, things like that. That information will be coming out soon, but I think every Ignite build is probably going to want to use this. So when you use Flame Surge on an enemy, this is a spell that that strikes enemies in front of you with a surge of flame. Burning enemies are dealt more damage. If you hit an ignited enemy, it will create burning ground under them. So this is something that will be really strong against enemies that you can get to stand reasonably still. Decoy Totem may be necessary to make that happen in a lot of cases. Once you've got them standing still though, you'll need to ignite them with something else because Flame Surge can never ignite enemies. And then once they're on fire, you want to zap them with Flame Surge. Flame Surge will deal an initial hit amount of damage that will be considerable, but then additionally, it will set the ground on fire underneath them. Now, my understanding of this wording, if you've got an ignite on the enemy that is inflicting 100,000 damage per second, the burning ground will be 25,000 before support gems and before modifiers on your character, but that is going to be a lot of damage per second once you scale in all of your characters' burning damage, increased elemental damage, and fire damage over time multiplier. Once you stack all of that up together, you could be looking at sort of doing triple, quadruple the amount of damage from that burning ground that the ignite was already dealing to that enemy. So based on that, I think that, assuming I am understanding Flame Surge right, it's going to be a must-use for ignite builds. Unfortunately, it's not likely to be something that will be implemented in a path of building anytime soon. So if you are planning to build an ignite build, put Flame Surge in it, test it out in practice, see how it feels on bosses, and if it's terrible, then have a backup plan in mind. Flame Wall is next, and Flame Wall is just, again, more of the same damage over time changes. Flame Blast is similar where it's... so this is a less significant change from memory than Val Flame Blast had because Flame Blast can be used reliably. Flame Blast is a super hard-hitting fire skill, and as a result is something that can do devastating ignites. It's also one of the clunkiest skills in the game. Frostbomb is next, and Frostbomb is interesting in that it's got 4% more damage with hits per 100 milliseconds duration. So the meta for using Frostbomb has been to decrease the duration if you're using it offensively, and it's something that is going to take a couple of nerfs here as well. Ultimately, I think that Frostbomb is in a weaker place than it was before. I think that's my gut feeling. I could be wrong on that, but I think that it's just going to be an... Yeah, I'm not keen to play this. I would have liked to have played it a couple of leagues ago when it was kind of nuts, but I don't think it's in a great place now. Okay, Frost Shield picked up the critical tag, which generally doesn't matter. Hex Blast is getting increased effectiveness of added damage, increased base damage, but is losing some of the damage with ailments per scaling from Doom. Ultimately, this makes Hex Blast with automatic cursing better, and reduces some of the incentive for the super clunky playstyle of manually curse, wait up Doom, then Hex Blast. You can still do that, and it will still give more DPS than just playing Hex Blast the more conventional way of using an automated curse. But I think that it will be that the gap between them is smaller, and that's going to make Hex Blast feel more comfortable to play. Ice Spear gaining critical tag, Icicle Mine critical tag. Incinerate is losing some of that more damage with Ignite, but still is going to be stronger than it was. Lightning Spire Trap, critical tag, critical tag. Now, we have the Penance Brand is also getting some Ignite-related nerfs that do not make up for the Ignite-related buffs in the overall patch notes. Purifying Flame is getting a 10% buff, so I wasn't expecting this. This skill's been good for a while. It's something that's often used with mines and can do a lot of damage with them. Purity of Elements is next. Purity of Elements is getting changed from a 35% reservation to a 50% reservation, and it is granting immunity to elemental ailments. This is going to be a lot better than it was. I do think it will be a genuine choice nowadays to maintain Purity of Elements for a long time in maps. The benefit that you get from it, because you are able to not have as much resistances on gear, you can therefore start to focus on getting other things on gear instead. Get more damage and stuff like that. And, chaos resistance. Additionally, Purity of Elements has a couple of really solid Watcher's Eyes mods. So I kind of like this change as an overall package. But Purity of Elements will be a little bit harder to use while leveling because it's now a 50% reservation. You can no longer use Purity of Elements plus 2 Heralds, for instance. Whereas you could have done that in 3.15. Righteous Fire, Scorching Ray, these are just a bunch of the damage over time changes, same as everything else. Tempest Shield is getting a total overhaul. So this is granting 25% spell block while holding a shield. This is a huge deal. This is absolutely amazing. And with or without Glancing Blows, this is going to be central for a lot of players that try to cap their spell block. However, remember that you need to be using a shield for this. Buff grants a chance to shock enemies and immunity to shock. If you're using a shield, Tempest Shield is really worth your while trying. So it's a 25% reservation now, and it is going to be really solid. I just think that this is a great skill now, and something that's going to be one of the more powerful defensive reservations in the game, alongside things like Determination and Grace, or for that matter, even Purity of Elements. Really liking what they've done with this skill. But again, only use it in conjunction with a shield, because my first thought when I saw these changes was, oh, I'm having spell block issues on my planned League starter. How am I going to fix them? Oh, this will fix it. Then I realized, no, that's not going to work for me. Voltaxic Burst is next, and this is just getting some numerical changes, one of which is a mechanical one, but it's essentially it's just a tiny amount of extra damage. Big thing, though, is the increased critical strike chance. It needed that. I think it probably needs a bit more. I think what it needs is a little bit more radius. If it gets a bit more radius, then I'll have another look at this skill. As it is, it's so hard to scale the Voltaxic damage, which is where you've got lightning that's partially converted to chaos. This is just really tough damage to scale. There's a couple of ways you can try and do it, like Eternity Shroud and Conversion, but they're super expensive now, ever since the change to add Beric's Grip into the main drop pool. And as a result, I'm not inspired to try it yet. Vortex again and Wintertide Brand is more of the changes that have been made to cold damage. Zealotry gets critical tag, it doesn't really matter for most players. And Anomalous Precision is changing the reservation effect that it's got, and a bunch of other anomalous gems will get that. So 10% reduced reservation is now 20% local reservation efficiency. Anomalous Firestorm is getting a little bit of a nerf here, but is getting chance to ignite enemies instead. That was something that was going to be too good with the changes that are being made to the ignite setup. Anomalous Purity of Elements is getting the increased effective aura instead of the chance to avoid ailments. That's going to be really good. So it's already obviously giving you 100% avoidance to ailments or immunity. So it's just going to give you increased effective aura, so more and more elemental resistances. The more you can get from unusual sources like Purity of Elements, the less you need to get on your gear, and the more space you have for powerful influence mods there. Divergent Vigilant Strike is getting a sharp nerf to its cooldown reduction. Ambush is getting critical strike. Yeah, it's just getting the critical strike chance effect scaled up a little bit. Well, changed into this base crit instead. Divergent Temper Shield is looking really strong now with 27% chance to block a spell damage, like instead of 25. Again, that's going to be enough for a lot of builds to get over that line of of Glancing Blow spellblock capped. Divergent Wrath is basically the same thing, except it's getting 4% reservation efficiency instead of the 2% reduced reservation. This is going to be really good for a lot of players. If you can pick up Divergent Wrath, if you're using Wrath already, you can pick up Divergent Wrath. That will be enough to free up just a little bit of mana. If you're running 2 auras that are 50%, you may not need to get any more reduced reservation anywhere else on the tree. Cast on Melee skill support, Cast on Melee kill is going from 140 to 120%. It's still not worth using even if it goes to 60. Melee Fortify is just getting changed with the way that Fortify is working now. This basically will make it a lot worse on skills that do very, very, very little damage, but that's more of a change that was discussed in the patch notes than one that's relevant to the gem. Inspiration support is being changed a little bit, and I've just got to quickly parse it. So it's gaining inspiration charge when you spend mana on upfront costs or effects of supported skills. So what they're doing here is they're changing the way that it interacts with skills that steadily drain mana over time. That's the main thing that they're doing there. That's the link skills, essentially. Skills that drain mana over time. Cast on Critical Strike support, and of course its Awakened version, are getting the critical tag, which is a huge deal for Awakened Cast on Crit. Additionally, Cast on Critical Cast on Critical support is having its reservation multiplier changed, but this will now apply to both the initiating attack and the payload spell, whereas previously I think it was 140% to the initiating attack only. GGG's intention here was that this would be a negligible overall effect. It's not intended as a balance change so much as something that will be a cleaner and more understandable way to present the effect of the skill. Charge Trap supports is picking up the critical tag. Again, critical mastery is going to be pretty good on a number of things. I feel like this is one of the support gems that scales a little bit more with gem level, although I need to check that out. Critical Strike Affliction support definitely is one that scales a lot with gem level if you can make this work. This is the old poison support, and it's going to give a tremendous amount of dot multi for ailments from crits, which will sometimes be a useful setup, but is quite tricky to make work. Nightblade support is just getting critical tag. Castle Channeling is getting the same effect as happened to Cast on Crit. More critical tags, and Impending Doom support is having a significant nerf to the amount of more damage with ailments based upon the amount of Doom on it. However, it should still be stronger in basically every situation that you could use this in previously. Increased critical damage it is a big deal that this gem is getting the ability to gain 3 levels from the critical mastery. So this is going to be a significant thing for that. They're gaining the critical tag, and in critical strikes it's less significant but it's still a bonus. Just the damage over time changes, just the critical tag changes, and then from here it's pretty much minor stuff all the way down. It's stuff that's like various until we get to the Awakened gems, that is. That's all sorts of stuff little stuff that's happening to anomalous gems. And then we have the big ones. So Awakened added fire damage support is losing +1 to the level of supported fire skill gems and gaining +1 to the level of supported fizz skill gems. This is a buff. I still don't think it's enough for Awakened added fire to be useful. I think most skills that are playing a physical but gets lots of extra fire damage type setup will not choose to use Awakened added fire. They'll do something else, but it is something that is going to be better than it was last league. Awakened Brutality picks up the ability to crush enemies for 4 seconds on hit, which is significant. You only get this at gem level 5. Awakened Burning Damage support is a big deal. This is getting +1 to the level of supported fire skill gems, but only at gem level 5. And so leveling this to 5 is going to be a big deal for a lot of Ignite builds. And basically where this has been a pretty much unused support gem in 3.15, this is going to be a chase gem in 3.16. Awakened Elemental Damage with attack support is granting Reflect immunity, but only at gem level 5. I kind of wish this one would come online earlier. I feel like this sort of thing that could have come online at, say, gem level 3. But it is going to be a really significant thing to have because it renders you immune to a bunch of annoying map mods and also makes Uberatsuri much easier. Awakened Fire Pen gives a chance for skills to inflict fire exposure on hit. This is only a small chance, but it's still meaningful. This is more like this is a genuine bonus for builds rather than something that's worth going out of your way to get. You already would want Awakened Fire Pen on a bunch of builds just because it's better than Fire Pen. So for that reason, you're going to want to upgrade it to something that's better. And the exposure is a small upgrade there. Awakened Melee Fizz is granting the ability to intimidate enemies for 4 seconds on hit. This is going to be pretty solid. This will be something that you will want to get your hands on if you are playing a melee physical damage scaling build. This is now a chase item again. Awakened Melee Splash support, +1 to the level of supported strike skills is not a big deal for most of them, but there's just the odd one or two that it is meaningful on. Pure numbers upgrade on the Awakened Multi-Strike, pure numbers changes on Awakened Arrow Nova, and here's the one that's getting the biggest changes of all, Awaken Cast on Critical Strike support. So, the way that Awaken Cast on Critical Strike support scales with gem levels, it is a huge deal that this is getting the critical tag. Like, this is off the planet enormous. To get 3 more levels on Awaken Cast on Critical Strike. It causes the cooldown reduction to shoot up. And that's the thing that you really want with Awaken Cast on Critical Strike support. That's the thing that makes it stand over and above the regular Critical Strike support. And getting 3 more gem levels means you'll get a big buff because I did check it. It does scale all the way to 8 at the moment and potentially beyond. So yeah, this is a huge deal. This was always a good Awakened gem, but it's now much better, and just because of that critical tag. Okay, so again, Cold Penetration is the same deal as Fire Pen. You definitely want this. You already wanted this gem, but it's now better than it was. Deadly Ailments is just getting straight out numbers buff, but it's a meaningful one. Fork is numbers buff. GMP is a numbers buff. Swift Affliction is a numbers buff. And Vicious Projectiles is a numbers buff. Void Manipulation support at gem level 5 only is picking up +1 to the level of supported Chaos skill gems. This is a big deal for some skills and a small deal for a lot of others. You want to play around with it and find out how significant this is, but I do think this is something that's worth working towards in a trade league at least, where you can work towards it. Awaken Cast while channeling is pretty significant in a single niche. So if you are using Cast while channeling, the ability to avoid interruption from stuns is a big deal, but it's a much bigger deal if you are using a skill that is not Cyclone. So this is a bigger deal for things like Divine Ire. If you happen to be using Divine Ire or Lightning Tendrils or something like that to trigger Cast when channeling, then this is going to be really, really good, this change, but it does only come online at gem level 5. The Cyclone, you tend not to be in the place where the stunning hits would land, even if your character is not immune to stuns. Controlled Destruction grants the ability to unnerve for 4 seconds. That's a big damage multiplier. It's not going to have a high uptime, but it will be there. Supported Elemental Gems getting +1 on Awakened Ally Focus is a big deal again. This is something that's really significant for a bunch of things. I really need to investigate whether this will work as well as I think it will in conjunction with the with Flame Search. So that's something I've got to find out by playing around with it in the next league. Awakened Hex Touch is getting a buff. It is not nearly as strong as it was at gem level 5 back a few leagues ago, but it is still really good, and it is miles better than it was in 3.15. +1 to the level of supported curse skill gems matters more for some skills than for others, and this is a considerable buff to Despair. Despair gets more from gem levels than pretty much any other curse. Awakened Lightning Pen is getting the ability to inflict lightning exposure, same as the other ones. Minion damage support is interesting, +1 to the level of supported minion skill gems. This varies a lot from minion to minion, and assuming that Spectres are still very strong, this will be a big deal for some Spectres depending on where you are on various breakpoints. Awakened Spell Echo support is getting numerical buffs that will be is getting buffs and nerfs at the same time, but overall, the overall package is a buff, and I think that this will be a stronger version of the support gem than it was. Unbound Elements is just getting pure numerical buffs, and Awakened Unleash is getting an enormous buff at gem level 5. So that is a bit of a marathon, but that is all of the changes to the skill gems that are happening. So the big deal, obviously, is the new skill gems, but a bunch of and also Flame Surge, in my opinion, and Awakened Custom Critical Strike. Those are the biggest ones. If you've got any comments or questions, though, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and I will see you at League Start, which is currently, at the time I'm recording this, it's only 42 hours away.